The rumble of a failing engine broke the calm afternoon as a cherry-red 1965 Corvette Stingray limped into Jack Miller's modest garage on the outskirts of Millfield, Montana. Jack wiped the grease from his hands and stepped out from under the '98 Ford he'd been working on. The Corvette was a sight to behold, even in its current state, chrome gleaming despite the obvious mechanical troubles. But it was the woman behind the wheel who caught Jack's attention. She wore an elegant business suit that seemed out of place in this dusty corner of Montana, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Little did Jack know this chance encounter would change not only his life, but the lives of his 3 children. Forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Miller hadn't planned on being a single father to 3 kids before he turned 40. Life had other plans when his wife Sarah passed away from cancer 2 years ago, leaving him to raise their children, Emma, 14, Lucas, 10, and little Abby, 6, on his own. The transition from being a part-time mechanic at someone else's garage to opening his own small business in their barn had been born out of necessity. The flexible hours allowed him to be there when his kids got home from school, even if it meant working late into the night after they went to bed. The afternoon Eleanor Prescott's Corvette rolled into his life was unusually warm for April in Montana. Jack had been struggling to make ends meet that month. The property taxes on their modest home were due. Lucas needed new glasses after breaking his 2nd pair this year, and Emma's school band was planning a trip to Chicago that she desperately wanted to attend. "Excuse me?" the silver-haired woman called out as she stepped from the car. Her voice carried a hint of East Coast refinement that seemed foreign in these parts. "My car seems to be having some trouble. The engine started making this terrible noise about 10 miles back on the highway." Jack nodded, wiping his hands on the red shop rag that perpetually hung from his back pocket. "Let me take a look, ma'am." He gestured for her to pop the hood. "It's Eleanor," she said, extending her hand. "Eleanor Prescott. Jack Miller." His calloused hand engulfed her smooth one in a brief handshake. "Nice to meet you, Miss Prescott." "It's just Eleanor." She smiled, revealing laugh lines that softened her otherwise formal appearance. "And I hope you can help. This car belonged to my late husband, and I was driving it back to our family property about 80 miles north of here." Jack leaned over the engine, his practiced eyes scanning the machinery. The Corvette was a beauty, a 1965 Stingray with original parts meticulously maintained. Whoever had owned it before clearly loved it. "You picked a good spot to break down," he said. "I specialize in classics." "Seems like fate," Eleanor replied, watching him work with a measured gaze. "Dad!" The call came from the side door of their farmhouse, where Emma stood with her backpack still slung over one shoulder. Lucas forgot his inhaler at school again, and the nurse called. Jack straightened, a flicker of worry crossing his features. "I'll call right back. Tell her we'll pick it up tomorrow morning before class." Eleanor observed the exchange with interest. "Your daughter?" "Yeah, my oldest." Pride mingled with exhaustion in his voice. "Got 3 of them inside. They're good kids." Jack returned his attention to the car, methodically checking components until he found the issue. "Looks like your timing belt gone, and it's caused some damage to the valves. Not something I can fix today. Need to get parts." Eleanor's shoulders slumped slightly. "I was afraid it might be serious. Is there a hotel nearby?" "Nearest one's in Grantsville, about 30 minutes away," Jack said. "But they're probably booked. There's a fishing tournament this weekend." "Dad." This time it was Lucas at the door, his glasses askew on his freckled face. "Abby's trying to make mac and cheese and she can't reach the pots." Jack glanced apologetically at Eleanor. "Duty calls. Give me a second." When he returned 5 minutes later, he found Eleanor sitting On the wooden bench outside his garage, her tailored jacket removed, revealing a simple white blouse. She was watching a pair of magpies build a nest in the old oak tree. "Sorry about that," Jack said. "My youngest thinks she's a chef. Had to make sure she didn't burn down the kitchen." No apologies needed. Eleanor's smile seemed warmer now. "Children come first. I had 2 of my own, though they're grown now with children of their own." Jack hesitated, then made a decision that wasn't strictly business-wise, but felt right. "Listen, I can call Hank at the tow company to take your car into town, but there's no guarantee you'll find a room. Or, he paused. "We have a small guest room above the garage. It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome to stay the night. I can start on your car first thing tomorrow." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "That's very kind. Are you sure it wouldn't be an imposition?" "Not at all. My kids would actually love the company. We don't get many visitors out here." That evening, Eleanor Prescott found herself seated at the miller's worn oak dining table, surrounded by curious children and the aroma of Jack's specialty, chicken parmesan, that he'd learned to make from Sarah's mother. "So you drive a Corvette?" Lucas asked, his eyes wide behind his taped-together glasses. "That's the coolest car ever." "It was my husband Thomas's pride and joy," Eleanor explained, cutting her chicken into neat pieces. "He passed away 6 months ago, and I'm just now taking it to our property up north." "I'm sorry about your husband," Emma said quietly, displaying a maturity beyond her 14 years. Eleanor nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you, dear. It's been difficult, but life continues." She turned to Jack. "Your children are lovely. You've done well with them." Jack's cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. "We manage. Some days are better than others." After dinner, as the kids cleared the table, a well-choreographed routine that spoke of established responsibilities, Jack made coffee and led Eleanor to the small living room. Family photos lined the mantel, most featuring a beautiful dark-haired woman with Jack's same warm eyes. "Sarah?" Jack said, noticing Eleanor's gaze on the photographs. "My wife. Cancer took her 2 years ago." "I'm very sorry," Eleanor said softly. "It's not an easy road, is it, being left behind?" "No," Jack agreed, handing her a steaming mug. "But the kids give me purpose. Can't fall apart when they need you to hold it together." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Thomas and I were married for 42 years. High school sweethearts. The property I'm heading to, we bought it back in the 70s as an investment. Nearly 2,000 acres of Montana wilderness. We always planned to retire there, build a home overlooking the creek that runs through it." Her voice grew distant. "Never got around to it. Thomas was always too busy with his law practice, and I had my career in finance. We kept saying, 'next year,' until suddenly there were no more next years for us." Jack listened, recognizing the familiar ache of regret in her voice. "I know what you mean. Sarah and I had all these plans too." The conversation flowed easily after that. 2 strangers connected by shared loss and unexpected circumstances. Eleanor learned about Jack's struggle to keep his business afloat while being both mother and father to his children. Jack discovered that Eleanor had been a financial advisor at a prestigious firm in Boston before retiring 3 years ago. "Why Montana?" Jack asked finally. "If you don't mind me asking, seems a long way from Boston." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "Thomas fell in love with this land during a fishing trip in his 20s, said it was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. The property came up for sale in 78, and he convinced me we should buy it as an investment. Over the years, we added more acreage whenever adjacent lots became available. It became our dream. Someday we'd build our forever home there." She sighed. "Now I'm not sure what to do with it. Seems wrong to sell it, but it's too much for just me." The next morning, Jack rose early as usual. He found Eleanor already awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains gold and pink. "You're an early riser," he commented, joining her with his coffee. "Old habits," she replied. "The financial world doesn't reward late sleepers." Jack nodded toward the garage. "I'm heading out to start on your car. Should be able to get the parts delivered by noon if my supplier in Grantsville has them in stock." "Take your time," Eleanor said. "This is the first moment of peace I've had in months. It's nice not to have anywhere pressing to be." Throughout the morning, as Jack worked on the Corvette, he became aware of Eleanor's integration into his family's routine. She helped Emma practice her flute for an upcoming recital, listened patiently to Lucas's detailed explanation of his dinosaur collection, and showed Abby how to make proper French toast, a skill she'd picked up during a year spent studying in Paris. By mid-afternoon, the parts had arrived, and Jack was deep into the repair work when he heard laughter from the house. Looking up, he saw Eleanor and Abby planting flowers in the small garden bed that had been Sarah's pride and joy, but had gone somewhat neglected in recent months. "Hope you don't mind," Eleanor called when she noticed him watching. Abby mentioned that these were her mother's favorite, and they needed some care. "I don't mind at all," Jack replied, surprised by the lump in his throat. "Sarah would be happy to see them thriving again." That evening, as a thank you, Eleanor insisted on cooking dinner, an elaborate pasta dish with a sauce that had been in her husband's Italian family for generations. The kitchen filled with unfamiliar but delicious aromas, and for the first time in months, Jack felt the house coming alive again with conversation and laughter. After the children were in bed, Jack and Eleanor sat on the porch swing, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. Stars sprawled across the Montana sky in a brilliant display rarely visible in cities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Your car will be ready by morning," Jack said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "I replaced the timing belt and fixed the valve damage. Should run good as new now." "You're very skilled," Eleanor remarked. "How did you learn?" Jack smiled, memories flooding back. "My dad. He was the local mechanic in the town where I grew up. I spent every spare moment in his shop from the time I could hold a wrench. When he passed, he left me his tools. That old red toolbox in the garage was his. A family legacy." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Those are important." "Yeah, well, I had hoped to pass it on to Lucas someday, but he's more into science and computers than engines." "Emma's got the mechanical touch, though. She can already change oil and replace brake pads." "Different legacies for different children," Eleanor mused. "That's how it should be." The next morning brought a clarity to the air that suggested spring was firmly taking hold. Jack finished the final adjustments on the Corvette, the engine now purring like it was meant to. When Eleanor came to inspect his work, her face lit up at the sound. "Thomas would be so pleased," she said, running her hand along the car's sleek hood. "He babied this car like it was our third child." Jack handed her the keys. "She's all yours. Should give you many more years of reliable service if you keep up with regular maintenance." Eleanor reached for her purse. "What do I owe you for the work and parts?" Jack named a figure that was fair but not excessive. He was struggling, but he wouldn't overcharge. It wasn't his way. Eleanor wrote a check for twice the amount. When Jack protested, she held up her hand. "The extra is for the hospitality, the comfortable bed, and for bringing life back to this car that means so much to me. Please accept it." Reluctantly, Jack took the check. The extra money would cover Lucas's new glasses and put a dent in Emma's. A band trip fund. As Eleanor packed her overnight bag into the Corvette, the children gathered to say goodbye. Abby hugged her fiercely, making her promise to come back someday. Lucas asked technical questions about the car's horsepower and top speed that made Eleanor laugh, as she admitted she had no idea. Emma, more restrained but equally affected by Their visitor offered a handmade bracelet of woven threads as a parting gift. For remembrance, the teenager said quietly. Eleanor slipped it onto her wrist immediately. I'll treasure it, Emma. Finally, she turned to Jack. Thank you for everything. It's been unexpectedly wonderful. Drive safely, he replied, unsure why this farewell felt more significant than it should. And if you have any trouble with the car, you'll be my first call, she promised. They watched as the red Corvette disappeared down the long driveway, its engine sound fading into the distance. Jack felt an odd emptiness, as if a vital energy had left with her. He shook it off, turning back to his day's work and the never-ending responsibilities of single parenthood. Life returned to its normal rhythm. 1 week passed, then 2. The extra money from Eleanor's check helped ease some immediate financial pressures, but Jack still found himself calculating and recalculating how to make ends meet as summer approaches. The property taxes were still looming, and the roof over the kitchen had started leaking during the last heavy rain. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the familiar rumble of the Corvette's engine made all 3 children rush to the windows. Jack stepped out of the garage, wiping grease from his hands, an involuntary smile spreading across his face as Eleanor Prescott stepped out of the car. But this time, she wasn't alone. A serious-looking man in a business suit emerged from the passenger side carrying a leather briefcase. Jack, Eleanor called, the formality of their first meeting now replaced with genuine warmth. I hope we're not interrupting. Never, he replied, trying to hide his curiosity about her companion. This is Robert Daniels, my attorney, she explained as they approached. I have something important to discuss with you, if you have a moment. Jack led Eleanor and her attorney Robert to the small sitting area on the porch, offering them iced tea that Emma quickly prepared. The children hovered nearby, curiosity evident in their expressions, until Jack gently shooed them inside to give the adults privacy. Is everything all right with the car? Jack asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Eleanor smiled reassuringly. The Corvette is running beautifully thanks to you. That's not why I'm here. She nodded to Robert, who opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder filled with documents. Mr. Miller, Robert began formally, Mrs. Prescott has asked me to prepare some legal paperwork that concerns you and your family. With your permission, I'd like to explain. Jack's stomach tightened. In his experience, unexpected legal documents rarely brought good news. Go ahead, he said cautiously. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes warm but serious. Jack, when I left here 2 weeks ago, I continued to my property up north. I spent several days there, walking the land, sitting by the creek where Thomas and I had once planned to build our home, and something became very clear to me. She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. I realized that at 72 I'm not going to build that dream house. My children live on the East Coast with their families. They have no interest in Montana property. If I kept the land, it would likely sit unused until after I'm gone, then be sold by my estate to some developer who would divide it into parcels. Robert cleared his throat. Mrs. Prescott has made a decision regarding the approximately 2,300 acres she owns. The property includes pristine forest, a year-round creek, and about 400 acres of usable grazing and agricultural land. Jack nodded, still confused about what this had to do with him. After considerable thought, Eleanor continued, I've decided to create a conservation trust for 1,800 acres of the wilderness portion. It will remain undeveloped in perpetuity, preserved for future generations. That's wonderful, Jack said sincerely. The Montana he loved was disappearing acre by acre as large ranches were sold off and developed. As for the remaining 500 acres, she said, her eyes never leaving Jack's face, I want to transfer ownership to you and your children. Jack blinked, certain he'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Robert pulled out a map from his folder, spreading it across the small porch table. This section here includes the creek front, this meadow, and these woods. There's road access from the county highway, and utilities are already available at the property line. Jack stared at the map, then at Eleanor, then back at the map. I don't understand. It's quite simple, really, Eleanor said, though nothing about this felt simple to Jack. You and your children touched my heart, Jack. In just 2 days, you reminded me what family means. You welcomed a stranger into your home. Your children brought joy I hadn't felt since Thomas died. She reached across the table to touch his hand. That land was meant for a family. Thomas and I never got to build our dreams there, but you can. 500 acres where your children can grow up with room to run, where Emma can practice her flute by the creek, where Lucas can explore nature for his science projects, where little Abby can plant gardens to her heart's content. Jack ran, a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. Eleanor, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's already done, Robert interjected, sliding several documents toward Jack. Mrs. Prescott has established a trust for your children with you as trustee until they reach adulthood. The land transfer requires only your signature to complete. But why? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's expression softened. Because kindness should be rewarded. Because I have more than I need. And you're working yourself to exhaustion to provide for those children. Because that land deserves to be loved by people who will appreciate it. She paused, then added, and selfishly, because I'd like to visit sometimes, if you'll allow it, to see what you build there, to perhaps be a small part of your family's story going forward. Jack looked down at the documents, emotions battling within him. Pride urged him to refuse such charity. Practicality reminded him of the opportunities this would create for his children. And something deeper, perhaps the part of him that had been lonely since Sarah died, recognized the genuine connection that had formed between Eleanor and his family. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted. Say yes, Eleanor urged gently. Not for me, but for Emma, Lucas, and Abby. For their future. Outside, a spring shower had begun, pattering softly against the roof. Through the window, Jack could see his children pretending not to eavesdrop, their faces pressed against the glass. There are no strings attached, Robert clarified. The property taxes are covered by a separate endowment Mrs. Prescott has established for the next 10 years, giving you time to develop sustainable income from the land if you choose to. Jack's mind raced with possibilities. He'd grown up on a small farm, knew how to work the land. With 500 acres, he could establish something that would provide for his family long-term. Maybe expand his mechanic business, specialize in restoration of classics like Eleanor's Corvette. The banks had denied his loan applications for expanding his current operation, but with land as collateral, the kids would have room to breathe, he said softly, almost to himself. Room to grow. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. Exactly. Jack took a deep breath and extended his hand to Robert. Do you have a pen? The attorney smiled and produced an elegant fountain pen from his breast pocket. As Jack signed the papers that would change his family's future forever, the front door burst open and 3 excited children tumbled onto the porch, unable to contain themselves any longer. Dad, did we really get land? Lucas exclaimed. Is there really a creek? Emma asked more practically. Abby climbed directly into Eleanor's lap. Will you come visit us there? Eleanor laughed, wrapping her arms around the little girl. Only if I'm invited. Every weekend, Abby declared decisively. Jack finished signing the last document, still dazed by this sudden turn of events. Kids, we need to properly thank Miss Prescott for her incredible generosity. It's still Eleanor, she corrected with a smile. And no thanks are necessary. Just promise me you'll build something beautiful there. Something filled with love. When can we see it? Lucas asked, practically bouncing with excitement. Eleanor and Jack exchanged glances. How about this weekend? She suggested. I could drive you all up there. Show you around. There's a perfect spot by the creek where your father might consider building your new home. Can we, Dad? Emma asked, a spark in her eyes that Jack hadn't seen since before Sarah's illness. Looking at his children's hopeful faces, at Eleanor's gentle smile, and at the signed documents that represented a future he could never have imagined, Jack felt something shift inside him. For 2 years, he'd been focused solely on survival, on holding what remained of his family together. Now suddenly, he could see beyond the day-to-day struggle to possibilities he'd thought forever lost. "Yes," he said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "Yes, we'll go this weekend." As if responding to the decision, the rain stopped and sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a rainbow over the distant mountains. Jack didn't consider himself superstitious, but even he had to admit it felt like a sign. "To new beginnings," Eleanor said softly, raising her glass of iced tea. "To new beginnings," Jack agreed, clinking his glass against hers, while his children's excited chatter filled the air around them with hope. The weekend couldn't come fast enough for the Miller family. Friday evening found them packing the old station wagon with supplies for their day trip to the property, what the children had already begun calling their land. Jack had taken the rare step of closing the garage for Saturday, something he normally couldn't afford to do. But this was special. Emma had been researching Montana wildlife on the school computer, preparing a list of animals they might spot. Lucas had packed his junior science kit, complete with soil testing equipment and specimen jars. Abby had insisted on bringing her collection of seed packets, already planning gardens that existed only in her imagination. Jack watched his children's excitement with a mixture of joy and trepidation. He still couldn't quite believe what had happened, couldn't wrap his mind around the idea that a woman who had been a stranger 2 weeks ago had changed their lives so dramatically. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of early summer day that made Montana famous. True to her word, Eleanor arrived at 7:30 a.m. sharp, the Corvette's engine announcing her presence before she even turned into the driveway. "Good morning, Millers," she called cheerfully as she stepped out of the car. She had traded her business. Attire for practical jeans, hiking boots, and a light blue button-down shirt, an outfit that somehow still managed to look elegant on her. "Eleanor," Abby raced down the porch steps and threw her arms around the older woman's waist. In just 2 days together, the youngest Miller had formed an unshakable attachment. "Are we all set for adventure?" Eleanor asked, returning Abby's hug, while smiling at Jack over the child's head. Jack nodded, returning her smile despite the knot of anxiety in his stomach. "As ready as we'll ever be, though I was thinking maybe we should take my wagon instead of your Corvette, more practical for the 5 of us." "Actually," Eleanor replied with a twinkle in her eye, "I thought the same thing. That's why I brought this." She gestured toward the road, where a shiny black SUV was pulling into the driveway. "My rental. I left the Corvette at my hotel in town. Robert was kind enough to follow me here before heading back to Boston." Jack watched as the attorney waved briefly before turning his car around and driving away. "You've thought of everything." "I tried to." Eleanor looked at the children, now gathering excitedly around the SUV. "Shall we?" The drive north took about 90 minutes, first along the main highway, then onto progressively smaller roads until they turned onto a well-maintained gravel drive marked only by a discreet sign reading Prescott Property. Pine forests grew dense on either side, occasionally opening to reveal breathtaking views of distant mountains. "It's like our own national park," Emma whispered, her face pressed against the window. Jack found himself equally awed. He'd lived in Montana his entire life, but had never owned more than the 5 acres their current house sat on. The idea that part of this vast wilderness now belonged to his family seemed impossible. As they crested a gentle hill, the forest opened into a sprawling meadow dotted with wildflowers. A creek, more substantial than Jack had imagined, almost a small river, cut through the landscape, its crystal-clear water sparkling in the sunlight. Beyond the meadow, the land rose again, covered in pines with glimpses of rocky outcroppings. Higher up, Eleanor parked the SUV at the edge of the meadow, near a flat area adjacent to the creek. "This is where Thomas and I planned to build," she said quietly. "He always said the morning light here was perfect." The children tumbled out of the vehicle, immediately drawn to the creek. Jack followed more slowly, trying to absorb the magnitude of the landscape. Eleanor walked beside him, her expression a mixture of memory and anticipation. "What do you think?" she asked after a moment. Jack shook his head, words failing him. "It's incredible. I never imagined—" "I know." She squeezed his arm gently. "The first time Thomas brought me here, I cried. It has that effect." They spent the morning exploring. Eleanor proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out various features of the property and explaining how the boundaries had been established. To Jack's surprise, the 500 acres she'd given them included not just the meadow and creek, but extended well into the forested areas on both sides. "The Conservation Trust begins at that ridgeline," she explained, pointing to a distant outcropping. "Everything before that is yours." Lucas discovered a family of otters playing in a quiet pool and spent an hour meticulously recording their behavior in a notebook he'd brought. Emma wandered along the creek, occasionally stopping to dangle her feet in the water or sketch something. In her journal, Abby stayed close to Eleanor, collecting wildflowers and learning their names. By midday, they had circled back to the meadow, where Eleanor spread a picnic blanket near the creek. From her seemingly bottomless tote bag, she produced a feast: fried chicken, potato salad, fresh rolls, and homemade lemonade. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," Jack protested. Eleanor waved away his concern. "I enjoy it. Besides, exploring builds an appetite." As they ate, Jack found his practical mind beginning to work, despite his overwhelmed emotions. He studied the lay of the land, noting where the sun fell, how the creek curved, where natural windbreaks existed. "You're thinking about building, aren't you?" Eleanor asked, observing his gaze. Jack nodded. "Just trying to imagine the possibilities. That rise over there would be ideal for a house. Good drainage, southern exposure, protected from the north wind by those pines." "That's exactly where Thomas wanted to build," Eleanor said with a smile. "He had an architect draw up plans years ago." She hesitated, then added, "I have them, if you'd like to see them. Not that you should use them. You'll have your own vision, but they might give you ideas." "I'd like that," Jack replied. The reality of what building here would entail was starting to sink in. It would take money he didn't have, time he couldn't spare. And yet, looking at his children's joy as they explored their new domain, he knew he would find a way. After lunch, Eleanor produced a large-scale map of the property and spread it on the blanket. "Let me show you the boundaries, water rights, and access points," she said, switching to a more businesslike tone. For the next hour, she walked Jack through the legal and practical aspects of the property, the county easements, the water rights. Dating back to 1902, the timber rights, the property tax assessments. Jack listened carefully, asking questions that revealed his practical nature and background in land management. "You know a lot about this," Eleanor observed. Jack shrugged. "My father was a mechanic, but my grandfather was a rancher. I grew up helping him before we lost the ranch in the drought of '83. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. "So this isn't entirely new territory for you?" "No," Jack admitted. "I've always dreamed of having land again someday. Just never thought it would happen like this." As the afternoon progressed, the children's explorations grew wider. Jack found himself standing by the creek, watching Lucas carefully collect water samples, while Emma sketched the mountains from a boulder midstream. Abby had fallen asleep on the picnic blanket, worn out from excitement and fresh air. "They belong here," Eleanor said softly, coming to stand beside him. Jack nodded, emotion tightening his throat. They do. I've been thinking, Eleanor continued after a moment. The transfer of the land is complete, but there's the matter of building. I know you wouldn't accept money directly from me, but Eleanor, Jack began, ready to refuse whatever offer was coming. She held up a hand. Hear me out. Thomas left a substantial trust for environmental conservation projects. One of his passions was sustainable building, structures that work with the landscape rather than against it. I propose a grant from his foundation to build an environmentally innovative home here, using it as a case study in sustainable rural development. Jack frowned, suspicious. That sounds like a convenient way to give us more charity. Not charity, Eleanor corrected firmly. Investment. The foundation would document the process, use it for educational purposes. You'd have to agree to open the house for occasional tours, share data on energy usage, that sort of thing. A demonstration project, Jack said slowly, beginning to understand. Exactly. The foundation funds various projects every year. This would be entirely legitimate. Robert has already confirmed it fits within the trust parameters. Jack stared out at the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. He was a proud man, raised to make his own way. But he was also a father who wanted to give his children every opportunity. And after Sarah's medical bills, after the struggle of the past 2 years, the reality was that he couldn't build here on his own. Not for many years, by which time Emma would be grown and gone. I'd need to be involved in every aspect, he said, finally. Design, construction, and I'd do much of the work myself. Eleanor's face brightened. Of course, that's the whole point. Combining traditional skills with innovative materials and methods, your contribution would be essential. And it would truly serve a purpose beyond just giving us a home? Absolutely. Thomas would have loved it. It brings together his passion for this land and his belief in sustainable living. She hesitated, then added more softly, and it would mean I'd have a reason to visit occasionally to check on the foundation's investment. Jack glanced at her, recognizing the underlying message. Eleanor wasn't just offering funding. She was asking to remain connected to them, to be part of what they created here. The children would be disappointed if you didn't visit, he said, his voice gentler than intended. Just the children. Her question hung in the air between them, neither accusation nor flirtation, but something more complex, an acknowledgement of the unexpected bond that had formed. Before Jack could answer, Emma called from her perch on the rock, "Dad, come look at this! I can see fish." The moment passed, but something had shifted. A quiet understanding reached without words. Jack called back, "Coming!" then turned to Eleanor. "Let's discuss the foundation's proposal more later. Right now, I apparently need to see some fish." Eleanor laughed. "By all means, fish are important." As the afternoon waned, none of the children showed any inclination to leave. Even Abby, after waking from her nap, insisted they should stay forever and ever. "We can come back," Jack promised. "Many times. But we need to head home before dark." "Actually," Eleanor said tentatively, "there's one more thing I'd like to show you before we go. It's about a 15-minute walk from here." Curious, they followed her along the creek, then up a gentle slope through pines. The path was well worn but narrow, suggesting it had been used for years but not frequently. As they crested the hill, Jack stopped short. In a small clearing stood a cabin, not large, perhaps 600 square feet, but solidly built of logs with a metal roof. A covered porch wrapped around 2 sides, and a stone chimney rose from the center. It looked weathered, but well maintained. "Thomas built this 30 years ago," Eleanor explained. "We called it our someday cabin. Someday we would retire here, someday we would build the main house, someday we would spend more than a weekend at a time here." She walked up to the cabin and unlocked the door. "It's rustic but functional. Solar panels for basic electricity, a propane stove, composting toilet, gravity-fed water system from a spring above. Jack and the children followed her inside. The interior was simple but charming. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a bathroom and a ladder leading to a sleeping loft. The furnishings were minimal but of good quality: a leather sofa, a pine dining table with 4 chairs, a bookshelf filled with field guides and classic novels. "It's like a fairy tale house," Abby whispered, eyes wide. "Thomas came up every summer. For 2 weeks of fishing," Eleanor continued. "I joined him when I could. We'd talk about our plans for the big house, walk the property, imagine our future here." Her voice caught slightly. "We always thought we had time." Jack understood then why she had waited until the end of the day to show them this place. It was personal, filled with memories, perhaps the hardest part to share. "It's perfect," he said quietly. Eleanor turned to him, composing herself. "It's yours too, part of the property. I thought, perhaps while you're planning and building the main house, you and the children might want to use it. Stay here. Get to know the land in different seasons." Emma and Lucas exchanged excited glances, clearly already planning weekend adventures. Abby tugged on Jack's hand. "Can we, Dad? Please?" Jack looked around the cabin again, seeing it with new eyes. Not as Eleanor's past, but as his family's future. Weekend retreats, summer projects, a place to heal and grow together. "We'd be honored," he said. Eleanor smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Good. I've left the keys on the hook by the door. The cabin is fully stocked. Linens, basic foods, firewood. It's yours whenever you want it." As they walked back to the SUV in the golden late afternoon light, Jack found himself walking beside Eleanor while the children ran ahead, still bursting with energy despite the long day. "Why us?" he asked finally, the question that had been nagging at him since she'd appeared with Robert 2 days ago. "Of all the people you could have given this to, family, friends, charities, why my family?" Eleanor was quiet for several steps, considering. "When Thomas died, I lost more than my husband. I lost our shared future, all those some days we'd planned. This land represented our biggest unfulfilled dream." She looked ahead at the 3 children, now chasing each other around. "The meadow. When I met you and your children, I saw something I recognized. A family that had lost someone essential, but was still fighting to build a future together. And I realized that while I couldn't have my someday with Thomas anymore, I could give this land to a family who would love it, who would build those dreams I couldn't." She turned to Jack, her eyes clear and direct. "It wasn't charity, Jack. It was continuity, a way to honor what Thomas and I wanted for this place, by passing it to people who would want similar things, people who would cherish it." Jack nodded, slowly, finally beginning to understand. "Thank you, not just for the land, but for seeing something in us worth believing in." "It was easy to see," Eleanor replied simply. As they reached the SUV, Jack made a decision. "Would you like to come back to our place for dinner? Nothing fancy, but the kids would love it, and we have a lot to talk about. This foundation grant planning, next steps." Eleanor's smile was answer enough. "I'd like that very much." Driving back down the gravel road, Jack glanced in the rearview mirror. All 3 children had crowded into the back seat with Eleanor, showing her their treasures from the day. Emma's sketches, Lucas's water samples, Abby's pressed flowers. Their excited chatter filled the vehicle, plans and questions tumbling over each other. For the first time since Sarah's death, Jack felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Not just hope, which had sustained him through the darkest days, but possibility. The chance to build something new, to give his children the life he and Sarah had dreamed of for them. He caught Eleanor's eye in the mirror and saw his own emotions reflected there: understanding, connection, and the quiet satisfaction of having set something important in motion. Whatever came next, their lives had been permanently intertwined by an act of generosity that went far beyond the transfer of property. The land was just the beginning. The weeks following their first visit to the property unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Jack found himself juggling his mechanic business with increasingly frequent trips to the land, as his family now called it. Each weekend, they would pack the station wagon with supplies and drive the 90 minutes north, staying overnight in the cabin and returning Sunday evening with renewed energy and endless plans. Eleanor had returned to Boston to settle affairs and coordinate with the Thomas Prescott Environmental Foundation, but she called several times a week. What began as conversations about the property and the proposed building project gradually evolved into something more. Discussions about the children's activities, books they'd been reading, even Jack's struggles with the day-to-day challenges of single parenthood. One Tuesday evening in early July, Jack sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by sketches and notes. Lucas and Abby were already in bed, but Emma lingered, interested in the house designs her father was working on. "What about solar panels on this section of the roof?" she suggested, pointing to the southern exposure. "My science teacher says they work best facing south." Jack smiled, impressed by her thinking. "Already in the plan, and we're looking at a rainwater collection system too." The phone rang, interrupting their discussion. Emma reached it first. "Hello? Oh, hi, Eleanor." Her face brightened as she chatted animatedly about her latest flute piece and a science project on water quality she'd started based on the creek samples. Jack watched his daughter, marveling at the transformation of the past month. Emma had been withdrawn since Sarah's death, assuming a burden of responsibility beyond her years. Now she was engaging with life again, making plans, showing interest in things beyond just helping to keep their family functioning. Eventually, Emma handed the phone to Jack. "She wants to talk to you about foundation stuff." "Hey," Jack said, tucking the phone between his ear and shoulder as he continued making notes on his design. "Hello," Eleanor replied, her voice warm even through the distance. "How are the plans coming along?" "Getting there. The architect the foundation recommended has been great. He's incorporating all our ideas while making sure everything is structurally sound and environmentally innovative." "Wonderful. That's actually why I'm calling. The foundation board meets next week to approve the final grant. Robert asked if you could send the latest plans and your materials list for their review." Jack nodded, forgetting she couldn't see him. "I'll fax them tomorrow. The solar system is more expensive than I'd anticipated, but I think it's worth it long term." "I agree. Don't worry about the budget. The board is committed to making this a showcase project." They talked for another 20 minutes about technical details. Then Eleanor asked, "And how are you, Jack?" "Really?" The question caught him off guard. Most people didn't ask that anymore. They assumed he was fine, or they didn't want to hear the complicated truth. He paused, aware that Emma had left the room, giving him privacy. "I'm better than I've been in a long time. Busy, always busy. But it's different now. Before, I was just trying to keep everything from falling apart. Now we're building something." "I understand," Eleanor said softly. "After Thomas died, I felt like I was just going through motions, maintaining what was left. It takes time to find purpose again." Jack appreciated that she didn't offer platitudes about things getting easier or time healing all wounds. They both knew some wounds simply became part of you, changing how you moved through the world. "When will you be back in Montana?" he asked, surprised by how much he wanted to hear her say soon. "Actually, that's my other news. I've finished arranging everything here and will be flying back on Friday. I thought I might drive up to the property on Saturday if you'll be there." "We will," Jack confirmed. "The kids will be thrilled. They've been asking when you'll return." Just the kids. The teasing question echoed their conversation by the creek weeks earlier. Jack smiled into the phone. Not just the kids. After they hung up, Jack returned to his plans with renewed energy. The project was ambitious. A 2,800-square-foot home, built into the natural rise of land near the creek, using sustainable materials and designed to maximize energy efficiency while complementing the landscape. The foundation's involvement had transformed what might have been a simple cabin into something truly special. But Jack had insisted on practicality throughout. This would be a family home, not just a showcase. The architect had incorporated a large workshop space where Jack could expand his mechanic business, specializing in restoration of classic vehicles. The property's location, while secluded, was actually more convenient to wealthy ranch owners in the northern part of the county. Potential clients who might appreciate his specialized skills more than the locals in Millfield. Friday arrived with a thunderstorm that threatened their weekend plans. Jack closed the garage early to help the children pack, all while watching the sky anxiously. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving behind cooler temperatures and a washed-clean feeling in the air. "Perfect camping weather," Lucas declared, as they loaded the final supplies. "We're not camping, dummy," Emma corrected. "The cabin has beds." "But we're going to roast marshmallows outside," Abby insisted. "That's camping." Jack smiled at their banter, remembering similar discussions from his own childhood. These normal moments of sibling interaction were precious to him, signs that despite everything they'd endured, his children were still children. They arrived at the property around midday on Saturday. Jack had a key to the gate now, and the children had established a routine. Emma would unlock the padlock, Lucas would swing the gate open, and Abby would close it behind them. Small rituals that made this increasingly feel like their land, their special place. As they bumped down the gravel drive, Lucas spotted it first. "Dad! There's a car at the cabin!" Sure enough, as they rounded the final curve, the familiar red Corvette came into view, parked beside the small cabin. Eleanor sat on the porch swing, reading a book, but stood as they approached. "You're here already!" Abby shouted, tumbling out of the car before Jack had fully stopped. Eleanor laughed, catching the whirlwind of excitement that was Abby Miller. "I got an early start. I hope you don't mind that I let myself in." "Of course not," Jack said, unloading their cooler. "You're always welcome." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple courtesy. This land had been hers. For decades, she required no permission, yet they both understood the significance of her deferring to them now, acknowledging that this was becoming their home. Eleanor had brought lunch, fried chicken again, recognizing how much they'd enjoyed it during their first visit. As they ate on the porch, she told them about her time in Boston, about arranging for her apartment there to be sold, about shifting most of her life to Montana. "You're moving here permanently?" Emma asked, surprised. Eleanor nodded. "I've purchased a small home in Grantsville. It's time to make this transition I've been putting off. My life is here now." Her eyes met Jack's briefly, then moved to include all the children. "And I'd like to be closer to my friends." After lunch, Jack spread the house plans on the porch table. Over the past month, what had begun as rough sketches had evolved into professional architectural drawings, complete with elevation views and detailed specifications. The foundation's involvement had accelerated everything, securing permits, lining up contractors, ordering materials. "Construction starts in 3 weeks. Jack explained, excitement evident in his voice. The foundation wanted to make this a fast-track project to take advantage of the full summer building season. Eleanor studied the plans with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about the choices they'd made. "This isn't just environmentally sound, it's beautiful," she said finally. "Thomas would have loved it. He always said buildings should look like they belong in their settings. That's what we're aiming for, Jack agreed. Using local materials whenever possible, working with the topography rather than against it. Later, while the children showed Eleanor their ongoing projects around the property, Lucas's weather station, Emma's sketches of the changing light on the mountains, Abby's small garden she'd started near the cabin, Jack took the opportunity to prepare a surprise he'd been planning. When they returned, he led them all to a spot about 50 yards from the cabin where he'd set up a small table draped with a cloth. "What's this?" Eleanor asked. Jack removed the cloth with a flourish, revealing a detailed scale model of the house they were planning to build. He'd worked on it late at night after the children were asleep, using his mechanical skills to create an exact miniature of their future home. "Oh, Dad," Emma breathed, leaning in to examine the tiny windows and the perfectly proportioned roof. "Did you make this?" Eleanor asked, clearly impressed. Jack nodded, a touch embarrassed by their reaction. "I wanted us all to be able to visualize it better, and I thought it might be nice to remember how it all began once we're living in the real thing." Eleanor touched his arm briefly, the gesture conveying what words could not. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I have something too," she said, opening the drawstring to reveal an old-fashioned brass key. "For the new house?" Lucas asked, confused. Eleanor shook her head. "No, for something else. Follow me." She led them along a path through the pines that Jack had noticed but never explored, assuming it led to another part of what was now the Conservation Trust. After about 10 minutes of walking, they emerged into a small clearing where a weathered boathouse stood on the edge of a pond fed by the creek. "I'd forgotten all about this," Eleanor admitted as she used the brass key to unlock the padlocked door. "Thomas built it during one of his solo trips. He loved to fish from a rowboat rather than from shore, said it gave him a different perspective." Inside the dim structure, suspended from the ceiling, hung an old-fashioned wooden rowboat. Though dusty from years of disuse, its craftsmanship was evident in the smooth lines and careful joinery. "Thomas made this by hand," Eleanor said, running her fingers along the gunnel. "Spent an entire summer on it. He named it Someday as a joke. One more thing we'd use when we eventually moved here." Jack examined the boat with a mechanic's eye, appreciating the skill involved. "It's beautiful workmanship." "It's yours now," Eleanor said simply. "All of it is. I just wanted to make sure you knew about this spot too." Lucas was already imagining the adventures they could have, while Emma calculated how they might get the boat down and into the water. Even Abby, normally indifferent to such things, seemed captivated by the little craft. "How about we put it in the water today?" Jack suggested, always practical. "Between the 5 of us, we should be able to manage it." What followed was an afternoon of shared effort and laughter as they carefully lowered the boat, carried it to the pond's edge, and tested it for leaks. To everyone's delight, Thomas's craftsmanship had endured. The boat was watertight and stable. They took turns rowing around the small pond, first the children with life jackets Jack insisted upon, then Jack himself, and finally Eleanor. Watching, her row with practiced strokes, her silver hair catching the late afternoon light, Jack felt something shift inside him. The easy companionship they'd developed over the past weeks had been gradually evolving into something deeper. Here was a woman who had given his family a future when they needed it most, who understood loss and rebuilding, who connected with his children in ways that honored Sarah's memory without trying to replace her. As the day waned, they built a fire near the cabin and roasted marshmallows as promised. The children, exhausted from the day's adventures, retired to the cabin earlier than usual, leaving Jack and Eleanor sitting by the dying embers. "Thank you," Jack said, into the comfortable silence. "Not just for the land and the house and everything else, but for today, for showing us the boathouse, for being part of this." Eleanor nodded, her profile gilded by the firelight. "I should be thanking you. When Thomas died, I thought I'd lost my future. I never imagined I'd find another one so different from what I'd planned, but equally meaningful." Jack added another small log to the fire, watching the flames catch. "I know what you mean. After Sarah, I was just surviving. I couldn't see a path forward that wasn't just more of the same struggle." "And now?" Eleanor asked softly. "Now I'm building something again. Not just the house, but a life for my kids, a future." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Eleanor said, "I've been thinking about the cabin." "What about it?" "Once your house is built, you won't need it anymore. I was wondering if you'd mind if I kept it as my personal retreat. I'd give you complete privacy, only come when invited, but I'd like to maintain that connection to the land." Jack turned to her, surprised. "Eleanor, you don't need our permission. This is as much your home as ours." "No," she said firmly. "I gave this land to your family without conditions. I wouldn't presume to maintain any claim to it." "Well, I'm giving you one," Jack replied with equal firmness. "Consider the cabin yours for as long as you want it. The children would be devastated if you didn't remain a regular part of this place. And so would I," he added more quietly. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "Jack Miller, you're a remarkable man. Sarah was fortunate to have found you, and so were those children." "We're the fortunate ones," Jack responded, "to have had Sarah in our lives for the time we did, and now to have you." The words hung between them, neither pushing for a greater definition of what having each other meant. There was time for that, time to see how this unexpected connection might evolve, time to honor their respective pasts while exploring the possibility of a shared future. As the fire died to embers, they made their way back to the cabin. Eleanor would sleep on the pull-out sofa in the main room, Jack in the sleeping loft with the children, an arrangement that respected boundaries while acknowledging the growing closeness between them. Standing on the porch, looking out at the star-filled Montana sky, Jack found himself thinking of Sarah, not with the sharp pain that had been his constant companion for 2 years, but with a gentle acknowledgement that she would approve of where they were now, of the opportunities their children would have, of the life they were building, of Eleanor. "Good night, Jack," Eleanor said softly, touching his hand briefly. Jack smiled at their banter, remembering similar discussions from his own childhood. These normal moments of sibling interaction were precious to him, signs that despite everything they'd endured, his children were still children. They arrived at the property around midday on Saturday. Jack had a key to the gate now, and the children had established a routine. Emma would unlock the padlock, Lucas would swing the gate open, and Abby would close it behind them. Small rituals that made this increasingly feel like their land, their special place. As they bumped down the gravel drive, Lucas spotted it first. "Dad! There's a car at the cabin!" Sure enough, as they rounded the final curve, the familiar red Corvette came into view, parked beside the small cabin. Eleanor sat on the porch swing, reading a book, but stood as they approached. "You're here already!" Abby shouted, tumbling out of the car before Jack had fully stopped. Eleanor laughed, catching the whirlwind of excitement that was Abby Miller. "I got an early start. I hope you don't mind that I let myself in." "Of course not," Jack said, unloading their cooler. "You're always welcome." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple courtesy. This land had been hers. For decades, she required no permission, yet they both understood the significance of her deferring to them now, acknowledging that this was becoming their home. Eleanor had brought lunch, fried chicken again, recognizing how much they'd enjoyed it during their first visit. As they ate on the porch, she told them about her time in Boston, about arranging for her apartment there to be sold, about shifting most of her life to Montana. "You're moving here permanently?" Emma asked, surprised. Eleanor nodded. "I've purchased a small home in Grantsville. It's time to make this transition I've been putting off. My life is here now." Her eyes met Jack's briefly, then moved to include all the children, and I'd like to be closer to my friends. After lunch, Jack spread the house plans on the porch table. Over the past month, what had begun as rough sketches had evolved into professional architectural drawings, complete with elevation views and detailed specifications. The foundation's involvement had accelerated everything, securing permits, lining up contractors, ordering materials. "Construction starts in 3 weeks, Jack explained, excitement evident in his voice. The foundation wanted to make this a fast-track project to take advantage of the full summer building season. Eleanor studied the plans with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about the choices they'd made. "This isn't just environmentally sound, it's beautiful," she said finally. "Thomas would have loved it. He always said buildings should look like they belong in their settings." "That's what we're aiming for," Jack agreed. "Using local materials whenever possible, working with the topography rather than against it." Later, while the children showed Eleanor their ongoing projects around the property, Lucas's weather station, Emma's sketches of the changing light on the mountains, Abby's small garden she'd started near the cabin, Jack took the opportunity to prepare a surprise he'd been planning. When they returned, he led them all to a spot about 50 yards from the cabin where he'd set up a small table draped with a cloth. "What's this?" Eleanor asked. Jack removed the cloth with a flourish, revealing a detailed scale model of the house they were planning to build. He'd worked on it late at night after the children were asleep, using his mechanical skills to create an exact miniature of their future home. "Oh, Dad," Emma breathed, leaning in to examine the tiny windows and the perfectly proportioned roof. "Did you make this?" Eleanor asked, clearly impressed. Jack nodded, a touch embarrassed by their reaction. "I wanted us all to be able to visualize it better, and I thought it might be nice to remember how it all began once we're living in the real thing." Eleanor touched his arm briefly, the gesture conveying what words could not. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I have something too," she said, opening the drawstring to reveal an old-fashioned brass key. "For the new house?" Lucas asked, confused. Eleanor shook her head. "No, for something else. Follow me." She led them along a path through the pines that Jack had noticed but never explored, assuming it led to another part of what was now the Conservation Trust. After about 10 minutes of walking, they emerged into a small clearing where a weathered boathouse stood on the edge of a pond fed by the creek. "I'd forgotten all about this," Eleanor admitted as she used the brass key to unlock the padlocked door. "Thomas built it during one of his solo trips. He loved to fish from a rowboat rather than from shore, said it gave him a different perspective." Inside the dim structure, suspended from the ceiling, hung an old-fashioned wooden rowboat. Though dusty from years of disuse, its craftsmanship was evident in the smooth lines and careful joinery. "Thomas made this by hand," Eleanor said, running her fingers along the gunwale. "Spent an entire summer on it. He named it Someday as a joke. One more thing we'd use when we eventually moved here." Jack examined the boat with a mechanic's eye, appreciating the skill involved. "It's beautiful workmanship." "It's yours now," Eleanor said simply. "All of it is. I just wanted to make sure you knew about this spot too." Lucas was already imagining the adventures they could have, while Emma calculated how they might get the boat down and into the water. Even Abby, normally indifferent to such things, seemed captivated by the little craft. "How about we put it in the water today?" Jack suggested, always practical. "Between the 5 of us, we should be able to manage it." What followed was an afternoon of shared effort and laughter as they carefully lowered the boat, carried it to the pond's edge, and tested it for leaks. To everyone's delight, Thomas's craftsmanship had endured. The boat was watertight and stable, They took turns rowing around the small pond, first the children with life jackets Jack insisted upon, then Jack himself, and finally Eleanor. Watching, her row with practiced strokes, her silver hair catching the late afternoon light, Jack felt something shift inside him. The easy companionship they'd developed over the past weeks had been gradually evolving into something deeper. Here was a woman who had given his family a future when they needed it most, who understood loss and rebuilding, who connected with his children in ways that honored Sarah's memory without trying to replace her. As the day waned, they built a fire near the cabin and roasted marshmallows as promised. The children, exhausted from the day's adventures, retired to the cabin earlier than usual, leaving Jack and Eleanor sitting by the dying embers. "Thank you," Jack said, into the comfortable silence. "Not just for the land and the house and everything else, but for today, for showing us the boathouse, for being part of this." Eleanor nodded, her profile gilded by the firelight. "I should be thanking you. When Thomas died, I thought I'd lost my future. I never imagined I'd find another one so different from what I'd planned, but equally meaningful." Jack added another small log to the fire, watching the flames catch. "I know what you mean. After Sarah, I was just surviving. I couldn't see a path forward that wasn't just more of the same struggle." "And now?" Eleanor asked softly. "Now I'm building something again. Not just the house, but a life for my kids, a future." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Eleanor said, "I've been thinking about the cabin." "What about it?" "Once your house is built, you won't need it anymore. I was wondering if you'd mind if I kept it as my personal retreat. I'd give you complete privacy, only come when invited, but I'd like to maintain that connection to the land." Jack turned to her, surprised. "Eleanor, you don't need our permission. This is as much your home as ours." "No," she said firmly. "I gave this land to your family without conditions. I wouldn't presume to maintain any claim to it." "Well, I'm giving you one," Jack replied with equal firmness. "Consider the cabin yours for as long as you want it. The children would be devastated if you didn't remain a regular part of this place. And so would I," he added more quietly. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "Jack Miller, you're a remarkable man. Sarah was fortunate to have found you, and so were those children." "We're the fortunate ones," Jack responded, "to have had Sarah in our lives for the time we did, and now to have you." The words hung between them, neither pushing for a greater definition of what having each other meant. There was time for that, time to see how this unexpected connection might evolve, time to honor their respective pasts while exploring the possibility of a shared future. As the fire died to embers, they made their way back to the cabin. Eleanor would sleep on the pull-out sofa in the main room, Jack in the sleeping loft with the children, an arrangement that respected boundaries while acknowledging the growing closeness between them. Standing on the porch, looking out at the star-filled Montana sky, Jack found himself thinking of Sarah, not with the sharp pain that had been his constant companion for 2 years, but with a gentle acknowledgement that she would approve of where they were now, of the opportunities their children would have, of the life they were building, of Eleanor. "Good night, Jack," Eleanor said softly, touching his hand briefly. "Good night," he replied, watching as she went inside. He remained on the porch a moment longer, listening to the night sounds of the property, their property. The distant call of an owl, the gentle gurgle of the creek, the whisper of wind through pine needles, sounds that would become the backdrop of their new life here. Tomorrow they would return to Millfield, to the mechanic shop, to the routine of daily life. But in 3 weeks, construction would begin on their home. By Christmas, if all went as planned, they would be living here permanently. Everything had changed because a Corvette's timing belt had failed outside his garage, because he'd offered his guest room to a stranger, because Eleanor Prescott had seen something in his struggling family worth investing in. Jack smiled to himself as he turned to go inside. Life had a way of surprising you, even when you thought all the surprises were over. The transformation of the Miller family's life accelerated. As summer progressed into early fall, construction on the house began in late July, starting with the foundation and moving quickly into framing. Jack visited the site daily, often bringing the children after school to watch their future home take shape. True to her word, Eleanor had settled into her house in Grantsville, a charming craftsman-style bungalow close enough to the property to visit regularly, but far enough to give the Millers their space. She'd become an integral part of their lives, helping Emma practice for her flute recital, taking Lucas to science museums on weekends, teaching Abby to bake bread in the small cabin kitchen. By mid-September, the house's exterior was nearly complete. The design, a harmonious blend of modern, sustainable architecture and traditional Montana ranch style, seemed to grow from the landscape as if it had always belonged there. Large windows captured the stunning views, while the partially earth-bermed north side provided natural insulation against the harsh winter winds. On a crisp Saturday morning, Jack stood at the building site with Dave Wilson, the contractor who had been overseeing the project. The two men surveyed the progress, their breath visible in the cool air. "We're ahead of schedule," Dave commented, checking items off his clipboard. "The solar array installation starts Monday, and the geothermal system is almost complete. If the weather holds, we should have you enclosed before the first real snow." Jack nodded, studying the timber frame that would soon support a living roof of native grasses and sedums. "It's hard to believe how fast it's coming together." "That's what happens when money isn't the limiting factor," Dave replied with a smile. "The Prescott Foundation isn't cutting any corners." Jack sometimes still struggled with the scale of what was happening. The house would be worth well over $1 million when completed, a sum he couldn't have imagined owning just months earlier. The foundation's involvement had transformed what might have been a simple family home into a showcase of sustainable building practices, complete with state-of-the-art systems and custom features. "Morning, gentlemen." Eleanor's voice carried from the path leading up from the cabin. She approached with a thermos and paper bag. "I thought you might appreciate some coffee and muffins." "You're a lifesaver," Dave said gratefully, accepting a steaming cup. "I've got to check on the crew installing the rainwater system. Back in 30. As the contractor walked away, Eleanor handed Jack his coffee, black with 1 sugar, exactly as he preferred. "The children still asleep?" Jack nodded, taking a sip. Exhausted from yesterday's hike, they wanted to explore every inch of that north ridge. They stood in comfortable silence looking at the emerging structure. "I keep expecting to wake up," Jack admitted, "find out this was all some elaborate dream." Eleanor's gloved hand found his, squeezing gently. "Not a dream, just an unexpected chapter." Their relationship had evolved gradually over the summer months. Neither rushed, both aware of the complexities involved. Jack was still healing from Sarah's loss, still figuring out who he was as a single father. Eleanor carried her own history, 42 years with Thomas, a lifetime of shared memories and plans. Yet they'd found in each other an unexpected connection, a friendship deepening into something more. The children had noticed, of course. Emma, ever observant, had asked directly one evening, "Do you like Eleanor, Dad? Like more than just a friend?" Jack had been honest. "I do, but it's complicated, sweetheart. There's your mom, and Mom would want you to be happy," Emma had interrupted, with a wisdom beyond her years. "She'd like Eleanor. I know she would." Now, as they walked through what would soon be the great room, with its soaring ceiling and wall of windows facing the creek, Jack found himself imagining a future he hadn't dared contemplate before. One where Eleanor was more than just the woman who had given them this opportunity, but a permanent part of their family's life. "I've been meaning to tell you," Eleanor said, interrupting his thoughts. "Robert called yesterday. The foundation, Board is sending a film crew next month to document the project. They want to create a short film about sustainable rural building practices. Jack frowned slightly. We'll still be in the construction phase. That's what they want, to capture the process, not just the finished product. They'll come back in spring for the final shots once everything is complete. She hesitated. They'd like to interview you and the children as well, to tell the human story behind the project. I'm not sure about putting the kids on camera, Jack said, protective instincts kicking in. I understand. I told Robert it would. Be entirely up to you. Eleanor touched his arm. There's no obligation. The grant doesn't require it. Jack nodded, appreciating her respect for his parental authority. Let me think about it. They continued their tour of the construction site, noting the progress in each area. The children's bedrooms were taking shape, as was the spacious workshop, attached to the garage where Jack would establish his expanded mechanic business. Have you thought about a name? Eleanor asked as they examined the workshop space. For your business here? Jack hadn't, but the question sparked something. Maybe Miller Restoration, something simple. I like it, Eleanor replied. Straightforward, memorable. And restoration is what you do, not just with cars. He looked at her questioningly. You restore things to what they should be, she explained. You've done it with your family after Sarah, bringing balance and healing. You're doing it with this land, creating something that honors its natural beauty. It's who you are, Jack. Her words touched him deeply. Before he could respond, the sound of excited voices announced the children's arrival. All three came bounding. Up the path from the cabin, Abby in the lead with a pine cone nearly the size of her head. Dad, Eleanor, look what I found, she shouted, brandishing her treasure. That's a whopper, Jack acknowledged, lifting her up so she could see through. What would become the kitchen window? Should we keep it for Christmas decorations? Abby nodded enthusiastically. Meanwhile, Lucas was already exploring the newly framed rooms, calling dibs on which bedroom would be his, while Emma examined the south-facing roof where the solar panels would soon be installed. Dave says we're ahead of schedule, Jack informed them. We might be moved in by Thanksgiving. This news was met with cheers. Their current home, while filled with memories, had become increasingly cramped as the children grew. The prospect of having their own spaces, designed specifically for their interests, a music nook for Emma, a science corner for Lucas, a window seat reading spot for Abby, had them bubbling with excitement. After exploring every corner of the construction site, they all walked down to the creek. The autumn colors were beginning to appear, golden aspen leaves contrasting with the deep green of the pines. Jack had built a simple dock during the summer, and now Lucas and Abby took turns dropping pebbles into the clear water, counting how long they took to sink. Emma, increasingly thoughtful as she approached 15, sat with Eleanor on a fallen log. Jack caught fragments of their conversation as he skipped stones across the water's surface. Something about high school next year, career possibilities, whether Emma might want to study architecture after seeing the house design process. It struck him how naturally Eleanor had become a mentor to his daughter, not trying to replace Sarah, but offering a different kind of female guidance as Emma navigated adolescence. He was grateful beyond words. Single fatherhood had many challenges, but perhaps the most daunting was wondering if he was enough for his daughters, if they needed a woman's perspective he couldn't provide. "Dad," Lucas called, breaking into his thoughts. "Can we take the boat out, please?" The rowboat had become a favorite weekend activity. "Sure, bud. Get the life jackets from the cabin, and I'll meet you at the pond." As Lucas and Abby raced off, Eleanor and Emma joined Jack. "Boat expedition?" Eleanor asked with a smile. "Apparently so. Emma, you want to join them?" Emma shook her head. "Actually, I wanted to work on my room design some more. Eleanor's been helping me plan the layout." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" "Nothing major," Eleanor assured him. Just some ideas about furniture arrangement and color schemes. Emma has quite an eye for design. The teenager beamed at the compliment. Is it okay if I go back to the cabin and work on my sketches? Of course, Jack replied. Just be careful walking back alone. Emma rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Dad, I know every inch of this property by now. I'll be fine. As she walked away, Jack turned to Eleanor. Color schemes? Eleanor shrugged, a little sheepish. She asked for my opinion. I hope that's okay. More than okay, Jack assured her. I know nothing about interior design. Sarah was always the one who handled that sort of thing. They walked toward the pond together, following the path now well worn from frequent use. Jack, Eleanor said after a moment, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. The seriousness in her tone caught his attention. Everything, all right? Yes, it's just... She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. The foundation board is planning a fundraising gala in Bozeman next month. They want to showcase this project as their centerpiece initiative. They've asked me to attend, as Thomas's widow and the original property owner. Makes sense, Jack agreed. Unsure why this warranted such a serious tone, they've also invited you as the homeowner and project partner. It would be an opportunity to meet potential donors, explain the practical aspects of sustainable building. From a resident's perspective, Jack grimaced slightly. I'm not much for fancy parties, Eleanor. Not really my scene. I know, she acknowledged, and under normal circumstances I'd say decline, but... She hesitated again. This could be important for your business. Many of the attendees will be wealthy ranch owners from across the state. Exactly. The clientele you've been hoping to attract for your classic car restoration work. Jack hadn't considered that angle. He'd been so focused on the house itself, he sometimes forgot the bigger picture, building a sustainable business that would support his family long-term. His specialized mechanical skills could command premium prices from the right customers. Plus, Eleanor added with a small smile, I'd enjoy having you as my escort for the evening. These events can be tedious without good company. Jack glanced at her, noting the hint of vulnerability beneath her. Confident exterior, Eleanor Prescott, former high-powered financial advisor, widow of a prominent attorney mover in Boston's social circles, was asking him, a small-town mechanic in worn jeans, to accompany her to a gala. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? He said with a smile, though I'll need to rent a tux. We'll find you something suitable, she promised, relief evident in her voice. Though I rather like you just as you are. The simple compliment warmed him more than it should have. Before he could respond, they heard Lucas calling from the pond, impatient for his promised boat ride. The afternoon passed in the easy rhythm they'd established over these weekend visits. Jack took the children out in the rowboat, while Eleanor prepared an early dinner at the cabin. Then they all gathered around the small table, sharing stories and plans. Mr. Peterson said, I can display my water quality project at the State Science Fair, Lucas announced proudly, referring to his ongoing study of the creek ecosystem. That's fantastic, Eleanor said, passing him a second helping of stew. When is the fair? March. Will we be living here full-time by then? Jack nodded. If all goes according to plan, we'll be moved in long before that. You'll be able to check your water samples without making the drive. Abby, not to be outdone, piped up. Miss Franklin said, I can bring my garden journal for show and tell next week. I have pictures of all the flowers we planted. Your classmates will be impressed, Eleanor assured her. Not many 6-year-olds can identify native Montana plant species. After dinner, as the evening cooled, they built a fire in the stone pit Jack had constructed near the cabin. Marshmallow roasting had become a weekend tradition, one that even Eleanor participated in, with increasingly less concern for sticky fingers. As darkness fell, the stars emerged in breathtaking clarity. Light pollution was minimal here, allowing the Milky Way to spread its glittering path across the sky. "Dad, can we sleep outside tonight?" Lucas asked. "In the tent?" They'd done this several times during the summer, but the autumn nights were getting cold. "Not tonight, bud. Temperature's dropping too much. But we'll set up the big tent next weekend if the weather's good." Eventually, the children drifted inside, exhausted from the day's activities. Jack and Eleanor remained by the fire, sharing the comfortable silence they'd grown accustomed to. "Jack," Eleanor said finally, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." He poked at the embers, sending sparks spiraling upward. "When the house is finished, and you've moved in, what happens to us?" The directness of the question surprised him. Eleanor was usually more circumspect about their evolving relationship. "What do you mean?" She gazed into the fire, choosing her words carefully. "Right now, we have this natural reason to see each other regularly. The property, the construction, the foundation project. But eventually, the house will be complete. The project will end. And I wonder... You wonder if we'll drift apart," Jack finished for her. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "It would be understandable. You'll be busy establishing your business. The children will be settling into their new schools and activities. Your life will take its natural course." Jack was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Then he reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "Eleanor, you're not just part of this project. You're part of our lives now. That doesn't end when the house is finished." She turned to him then, the firelight illuminating the question in her eyes. "Are you sure? I'm 25 years older than you, Jack. I have a different life behind me, different experiences. Your children need... My children need people who love them," Jack interrupted gently, "who support them and encourage them to become their best selves. You've been that person from the moment you met them." He squeezed her hand. "As for the age difference, I don't care. Sarah taught me that life is too short and too unpredictable to let other people's expectations dictate your happiness." Eleanor's eyes glistened in the firelight. "And are you? Happy?" "Happier than I ever expected to be again," he admitted. "Because of what you've given us, yes. But more than that, because of who you are. Your kindness, your wisdom, your way with the kids, the way you've become essential to us." He paused, then added quietly, "To me." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, some tension releasing from her posture. "I've been afraid to presume to push too fast. I know how much Sarah meant to you, how much you still love her." "I'll always love Sarah," Jack said honestly. "She gave me 3 incredible children and 10 wonderful years. That doesn't change." He turned slightly to look directly at Eleanor. "But my heart isn't finite, Eleanor. There's room to love again, differently but just as genuinely." The word love hung between them, neither taking it back nor exploring it further. It was enough for now to acknowledge the possibility, the direction they were moving in. "So," Eleanor said after a moment, her voice lighter, "you'll be my date for the gala?" Jack chuckled. "Yes, ma'am, though I can't promise I won't embarrass you by using the wrong fork or something." "I'll give you a crash course in formal dining beforehand," she promised with a smile, "though I suspect you'll charm everyone regardless." The fire burned lower, the night growing colder around them. From inside the cabin came the muffled sounds of the children preparing for bed, Lucas arguing about toothbrushing, Emma helping Abby find her pajamas. "We should go in," Jack said reluctantly, not wanting this moment to end. Eleanor nodded but didn't move immediately. "Jack?" "Yes?" "Thank you for making room in your life for me." He smiled in the darkness. "Eleanor Prescott, you created the room yourself. From the moment you drove that Corvette into my garage, you've been carving out a space in our lives that only you could fill." She leaned forward then, kissing him softly. Their first, brief and gentle, full of promise rather than passion. When she pulled back, her smile contained a certainty that hadn't been there before. "I think," she said, "that this is the beginning of something even better than what we've planned." Jack couldn't have agreed more. The Prescott Foundation Gala transformed the Bozeman Grand Hotel's ballroom into an elegant showcase of sustainable luxury. Living walls of native Montana plants created natural dividers throughout the space, while lighting powered by solar batteries collected during the day gave the room a warm glow. Even the food featured locally sourced ingredients from sustainable farms across the state. Jack tugged at his bow tie for the 100th time that evening. Still uncomfortable in the tuxedo, Eleanor had insisted on having custom tailored for him rather than rented. "You'll need it again," she'd reasoned, ignoring his protests about the expense. "The foundation will host annual events, and as their flagship project manager, you'll be expected to attend." He stood near one of the display areas, a scale model of their house, much more elaborate than his handcrafted version, surrounded by architectural renderings and informational panels about the innovative systems being incorporated. A continuous video loop showed time-lapse footage of the construction process thus far. Mr. Miller, a well-dressed older gentleman, approached, hand extended. "Douglas Harrington. I sit on the Prescott Foundation board." Jack shook his hand, recognizing the name from Eleanor's briefing before the event. Harrington owned one of the largest cattle operations in the state and was known for his interest in sustainable ranching practices. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. Eleanor's mentioned your work with rotational grazing systems." The rancher looked pleased. "Indeed. We've seen remarkable recovery of native grasslands using those methods. But I'm particularly interested in your project's water conservation systems. My ranch manager mentioned you've incorporated some innovations we might adapt for our operation." For the next 15 minutes, Jack found himself explaining the rainwater collection and grey water recycling systems being installed at the house. To his surprise, he was entirely comfortable discussing the technical aspects with this wealthy and influential man. 6 months ago, he would have felt intimidated in such a company. Now, secure in his knowledge and expertise, he spoke as an equal. Jack's being modest, Eleanor's voice cut in smoothly as she rejoined them, champagne flute in hand. "He's actually improved on the original designs. The engineers were so impressed, they're incorporating his modifications into future projects." She looked stunning in a deep blue evening gown that complemented her silver hair. Despite his initial reluctance about attending, Jack had found himself overwhelmed with pride to walk into the gala with Eleanor on his arm. "Eleanor?" Harrington greeted her warmly. "Thomas would be proud of what you've accomplished with the foundation. This project exemplifies everything he believed in." "Thank you, Douglas. That means a great deal." Her hand found Jack's arm, a gesture that had become natural between them. It wouldn't have been possible without Jack's practical expertise. He's brought the theoretical concepts down to earth. After Harrington moved on, Jack leaned closer to Eleanor. "You don't need to talk me up to these people. I'm just a mechanic who got lucky." Eleanor's gaze was stern. "Stop that. You're a talented builder, an innovative problem solver, and an exceptional father. The luck was mine, finding someone who could make Thomas's dream for that land a reality." Before Jack could respond, they were approached by a stylishly dressed couple in their 40s. "Eleanor," the woman exclaimed, "I was hoping to see you here." "Rebecca, Michael," Eleanor greeted them. "Lovely to see you both. Allow me to introduce Jack Miller, our partner in the Foundation's flagship project. Jack, Rebecca, and Michael Turner. Rebecca is the Foundation's chief financial officer, and Michael owns Turner Classic Automobiles." Jack's interest immediately piqued at the mention of classic cars. "Turner Classics. I've read about your restoration work in Auto Enthusiast magazine." Michael brightened. "You're into classics? Eleanor mentioned you're a mechanic, but I didn't realize you specialized in restoration." "It's been more of a side interest until now," Jack explained. But with the new workshop we're building, I'm hoping to focus on it more extensively. What's your specialty? Michael asked. American classics, primarily 50s through 70s. I've done a few full restorations, a 57 Chevy Bel Air, a 67 Mustang, and most recently, Eleanor's 65 Corvette. The Stingray. Michael looked impressed. That's a beautiful machine. Would you mind if I stop by sometime to see your setup once it's complete? I'm always looking to connect with skilled restoration specialists. We have more demand than we can handle at our Bozeman location. Jack blinked, surprised by the offer. I'd be honored. As the evening progressed, Jack found himself engaged in one promising conversation after another. A wealthy collector from Seattle who summered in Montana wanted to discuss restoring his fleet of vintage Packards. A local architect was interested in incorporating some of the sustainable building techniques into her upcoming projects. The foundation's director of communications wanted Jack to consult on future educational materials. You're a hit, Eleanor whispered during a rare quiet moment. How does it feel to be the belle of the ball? Jack chuckled. Surreal. 3 months ago, I was worrying about making rent on the garage. Now I'm discussing 6-figure restoration projects with collectors. Your life was always going to expand beyond Millfield, Eleanor said confidently. You just needed the right opportunity. You mean I needed you? Jack corrected, his gaze warm. Eleanor shook her head. I provided a catalyst, nothing more. The talent, the work ethic, the vision, those were always yours. Later, as they drove back to Grantsville through the star-filled Montana night, Jack reflected on the evening. You were right about the networking opportunities. I think I've lined up enough potential business to keep me busy for 2 years. Eleanor smiled, her profile illuminated by the dashboard lights. I told you. Those people appreciate craftsmanship and authenticity, both of which you have in abundance. They fell into comfortable silence for several miles before Jack spoke again. The kids were disappointed they couldn't come tonight. We'll make it up to them tomorrow, Eleanor promised. She'd arranged for all 3 children to stay with her closest neighbor in Grantsville, a retired teacher who had quickly become a trusted friend. Perhaps a special breakfast before we drive up to the property. They'd like that. Jack paused, then added, They see you as family now, you know, not just a benefactor or a friend. Family. Eleanor's hands tightened slightly on the steering. Wheel. And how do you see me, Jack? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. They'd been dancing around definition since that kiss by the fire 3 weeks earlier, both cautious, neither wanting to pressure the other, aware of the complexities of their situation. I see you, Jack said finally, as someone I can't imagine my life without anymore. Someone who fits with us in ways I never expected. Someone I've grown to love. Eleanor pulled the car onto a scenic overlook, cutting the engine. In the sudden silence, she turned to face him. Are you certain about all of this? About me? Jack reached across to take her hand. I've never been more certain of anything. When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd focus on the kids and just exist. Then you drove into my garage with that Corvette, and gradually, piece by piece, you helped me rebuild more than just my family's future. You helped me rebuild myself. Eleanor's eyes shimmered in the darkness. I've been afraid, she admitted, afraid I was inserting myself where I didn't belong. Afraid the children might resent me eventually. Afraid you might feel obligated because of the land, the house. Eleanor, Jack interrupted gently, do you remember what you told me that first day at the property, about why you gave us the land? She nodded. I said it was about continuity, honoring what Thomas and I had wanted for that place, by passing it to people who would cherish it. Well, this is about continuity too, Jack said. Not replacing what was lost, but building something new that honors the past while creating a future. Sarah will always be my children's mother. Thomas will always be your husband of 42 years. Nothing changes that. But life continues, and sometimes it offers unexpected gifts. He squeezed her hand. You are that gift to us, and if you're willing, I'd like us to figure out what that means together. Officially, intentionally, Eleanor's smile was radiant even in the dim light. I'd like that very much. The next morning, they collected the children and drove up to the property. Construction continued even on weekends now, as the team rushed to enclose the structure before winter weather set in. The exterior was nearly complete, the living roof partially installed, the stone and timber facade blending the structure into the landscape just as they'd envisioned. Look how much they did since last weekend, Lucas exclaimed, racing ahead. To inspect the latest progress, the site foreman Dave waved as they approached. Right on schedule, he reported. We'll have the solar array functional by Wednesday, and the interior work can continue regardless of weather after that. When can we start moving furniture in? Emma asked practically. Not for another 6 weeks, Dave answered, but you can start planning room layouts any time. The interior walls are all framed now, so you can see the actual dimensions. While the children explored, Dave pulled Jack and Eleanor aside. There's something you should see, he said, leading them to what would become the great room. The crew uncovered this when they were excavating for the foundation. We set it aside, thought you might want to incorporate it somehow. He pointed to a large, flat stone propped against the wall. At least 4 feet across, it was roughly circular and almost perfectly smooth on one side. It's beautiful, Eleanor murmured, running her hand over the polished surface. We think it might have been used as a grinding stone by indigenous people, Dave explained. The archaeologist we consulted said this area was likely a seasonal campsite for the Blackfeet tribe. This stone probably dates back several hundred years. Jack studied the ancient artifact with reverence. We should definitely include it somewhere. Maybe as a centerpiece in the entry courtyard? Or a table base in the great room, Eleanor suggested. A physical connection to the land's history. Dave nodded approvingly. That's what I was thinking. A reminder that we're just the latest caretakers of this place. The concept resonated deeply with Jack. From the Blackfeet who had first recognized this Creek Valley's special quality, to Thomas and Eleanor who had preserved it from development, to his family who would now make it their home. They were all part of a continuum of stewardship. That afternoon, as October sunshine bathed the property in golden light, the family gathered on the cabin porch for an important conversation. Jack had discussed this moment with Eleanor the night before, both agreeing it was time. Kids, Jack began, Eleanor and I wanted to talk with you about something important. 3 young faces turned toward him with varying degrees of curiosity and intuition. Emma, nearly 15 now, had a knowing look. Lucas seemed distracted by a hawk circling overhead. 6-year-old Abby was curled against Eleanor's side, already comfortable in what Jack was about to propose. Over these past months, he continued carefully, our lives have changed in amazing ways. Not just because of this land or the new house, but because of the people who've become part of our family. He glanced at Eleanor, especially Eleanor. Are you guys getting married? Lucas blurted with characteristic directness. Jack laughed, tension broken. Not yet, Bud, but Eleanor and I have talked and we are together now, as a couple. Finally, Emma muttered, rolling her eyes. We've known that for weeks. You have? Eleanor asked, surprised. The teenager shrugged. It's pretty obvious. You look at each other the way people do in movies. Jack felt his cheeks warm, but continued. We wanted to make sure you all were comfortable with this, with Eleanor being part of our family in a new way. Does this mean you'll live with us in the new house? Abby asked Eleanor, hopefully. Eleanor exchanged glances with Jack. They'd discussed this as well. Not right away, sweetheart. I'll keep my house in Grantsville for now, but I'll spend a lot of time here. With you all. We're going to take things step by step, Jack explained. But yes, eventually, if everything continues as we hope, Eleanor might join our household permanently. Cool, Lucas said, his attention already drifting back to the Hawk. Can I go check my weather station now? I need to record today's readings. Jack nodded, amused by his son's priorities. Lucas darted off, concern about his father's romantic life apparently satisfied in full. Emma lingered, studying them both thoughtfully. Mom would approve, she said finally. She always said life was for living, not just existing. She stood, stretching. I'm going to work on my music practice. The acoustics by the creek are perfect. As she walked away, Jack called after her. You're okay with all this, Em? Really? She turned, her expression serious beyond her years. Dad, we've all been lost since Mom died. Even you, though you tried to hide it, but we're finding our way back now. Eleanor's part of that. So yeah, I'm okay with it. Abby remained curled against Eleanor, apparently unconcerned with the grown-up complications. Can we bake cookies later? She asked, focused on more immediate priorities. Absolutely, Eleanor promised. I brought all the ingredients. As Abby skipped off to collect pine cones for decorating the cabin, Jack and Eleanor sat in the porch swing, shoulders touching. That went well, Eleanor observed. Better than I expected, Jack agreed. Though apparently we weren't as subtle as we thought. Eleanor laughed softly. Children see more than we give them credit for. They swung in comfortable silence, watching the autumn light play across the meadow. Construction sounds drifted from the building site, the steady rhythm of progress, of creation. I was thinking, Jack said after a while, about what Dave said this morning, about being caretakers of this land. Eleanor nodded. It's a beautiful concept. It applies to more than just the property, Jack continued. We're caretakers of these children, of their futures, of the legacy Sarah left, of the foundation Thomas created, of this new family we're building together. Jack Miller, Eleanor said with a smile, for a mechanic, you have the soul of a poet. Must be the company I'm keeping, he replied, taking her hand. You're rubbing off on me. As the afternoon waned, they joined the children in their various activities, helping Lucas record his weather data, listening to Emma's flute practice by the creek, assisting Abby with her ongoing project of learning every wildflower on the property. Simple moments that, strung together, were creating the tapestry of their new, shared life. Later, as they prepared dinner in the cabin's small kitchen, Eleanor teaching Emma a recipe that had been in Thomas's family for generations, Jack stepped outside for a moment alone. The sun was setting behind the western mountains, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. Construction on the house had paused for the day, the workers gone, leaving only the sound of wind in the pines and water flowing over stones in the creek. He thought about the incredible journey of the past 6 months. From the desperate struggle to keep his garage afloat and his family intact, to this moment of abundance and possibility. All because a timing belt had failed on a classic Corvette outside his shop on an ordinary spring afternoon. Some might call it luck or coincidence. Jack preferred to think of it as grace, the unexpected gift that arrives precisely when needed, though not always in the form expected. From inside came the sound of laughter. Eleanor and his children creating new memories, in this place that bridged past and future. Jack smiled and turned toward the cabin, toward his family, toward home. The red Corvette that had brought Eleanor into their lives now sat beside the cabin, its chrome gleaming in the last light of day. In time, it would have a permanent place, in the workshop attached to their new home. A reminder of how a broken machine had led to healing hearts, how a struggling single father and his children had found not just land, but a new beginning, and how a woman's generosity had come full circle, bringing her the family she thought she'd never have. Sometimes, Jack reflected as he walked toward the warm light spilling from the cabin windows, the most important repairs aren't to engines or timing belts, but to lives and hearts. and sometimes the most valuable restorations happen when we least expect them. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect Montana timing. A gentle snowfall began just as dusk settled over the valley, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. The newly completed Miller home stood proudly against the backdrop of snow-covered pines, its windows glowing with warm light that spilled onto the pristine white ground. The past 2 months had been a whirlwind of activity. Construction had finished, ahead of schedule, thanks to favorable weather and the dedicated crew's determination to have the family moved in before the holidays. Jack had closed his Millfield garage, referring his regular customers to another mechanic in town. The old house had sold quickly to a young couple expecting their first child, a serendipitous continuation that felt right to everyone. Inside, the new home, a massive pine tree dominated the great room, nearly touching the exposed beam ceiling. Lucas and Abby were placing the final ornaments, while Emma arranged presents underneath. The ancient grinding stone discovered during construction had indeed become the base for a circular table in the center of the room, its smooth surface now polished to a subtle sheen. "Perfect timing," Eleanor said, emerging from the kitchen with a tray of hot chocolate. She'd been spending more and more time at the house, though she still maintained her place in Grantsville. The relationship with Jack had deepened steadily, their connection growing stronger as they navigated this new chapter together. Jack entered from his workshop, wiping his hands on a rag. "The Corvette's all settled in its new home," he announced. They'd created a special display area in one corner of his state-of-the-art garage, where Eleanor's red Stingray now sat like a museum piece, a physical reminder of how their story began. "Can we open one present tonight, Dad?" Abby asked, her excitement barely contained. "That's the tradition," Jack confirmed. Since Sarah's passing, he'd maintained the Christmas Eve ritual of opening just one gift, saving the rest for Christmas morning. As the family gathered around the tree, Michael and Rebecca Turner arrived, their arrival announced by the musical chime Jack had installed instead of a conventional doorbell. The Turners had become frequent visitors over the past months, with Michael and Jack collaborating on several restoration projects already. "Merry Christmas!" Rebecca called, arms laden with gifts. Behind them came Robert, Eleanor's attorney and friend who had become a regular guest at family gatherings. "Just in time," Eleanor welcomed them. "We were about to open one gift each." The ritual began with the youngest. Abby selected a small package from Eleanor, tearing into it with characteristic enthusiasm to find a delicate silver bracelet with charms representing her favorite things: a flower, a book, a paintbrush, and a tiny cabin. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed, immediately extending her wrist for Eleanor to fasten it. Lucas went next, choosing a long, thin package from Jack. His eyes widened as he unwrapped a professional-grade telescope. "Wow, now I can document the constellations from my bedroom observatory." The dome-shaped extension off his room had been a last-minute addition to the house plans, Jack's surprise for his science-obsessed son. Emma selected a gift from both Jack and Eleanor, a velvet box containing an antique silver flute. "It was my grandmother's," Eleanor explained, as Emma examined it with reverence. "She taught music for 40 years. I thought it should go to someone who would appreciate its history." The adults exchanged their gifts next: books, wine, handcrafted items. When it came to Eleanor's turn, Jack handed her a small, unwrapped wooden box he'd clearly made himself, the joinery perfect, the walnut polished to a warm glow. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay a key, not modern but vintage, with an ornate bow and intricate cuts. Eleanor looked at Jack questioningly. "It's symbolic," he explained. "That's the original key to the cabin. I had it cleaned and preserved." He took a breath, aware of the expectant silence that had fallen over the room. "The cabin is yours, always. Has been. but I'm hoping you'll consider making this house your home too." Eleanor's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Jack, I'm not rushing you," he assured her. "I know we agreed to take things step by step, but it's been 6 months since that Corvette broke down outside my garage, and I know with absolute certainty that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So whenever you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or next year, there's a place for you here, permanently." The room held its collective breath as Eleanor looked from Jack to the children, who were watching with hopeful expressions. "We voted," Emma announced, breaking the tension, "unanimously in favor." Eleanor laughed through gathering tears. "Well, in that case, how could I possibly say no?" She took Jack's hand. "I've been ready for weeks, just waiting for the right moment. Turns out you found it first." The room erupted in cheers, Abby launching herself at Eleanor for a hug while Lucas performed an impromptu victory dance. Robert raised his wineglass in a toast, and the Turners exchanged knowing smiles. Later, after their guests had departed and the children had finally gone to bed, despite protests that they were too excited to sleep, Jack and Eleanor stood on the covered deck, watching the snow continue to fall. The creek gurgled softly beneath a thin layer of ice, and somewhere in the distance an owl called into the night. "Happy?" Jack asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Beyond words," Eleanor replied. "When Thomas died, I thought I was just living out the epilogue of my life. I never imagined there could be whole new chapters waiting." Jack nodded, understanding completely. "Sarah and I used to talk about growing old in a place like this, watching the kids grow up, seeing them start their own families someday. After she died, that dream seemed impossible." He turned to face Eleanor, taking both her hands in his. "You didn't just give us this land, Eleanor. You gave us back our future. And you gave me the same gift in return," she said softly. "A family, a purpose, a reason to look forward instead of back." Inside the house, the Christmas tree lights cast multicolored reflections on the ancient grinding stone table, past and present intertwined. Tomorrow, the children would wake at dawn, eager for presents and the promised snowball fight. The Prescott Foundation film crew would return in spring to document the completed project. Jack's restoration business was already booked 6 months ahead. Life stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. "Shall we go in?" Eleanor suggested after a while. "It's getting colder." Jack nodded, but held her back for one more moment. "Just so you know," he said, his voice serious but warm, "fixing that Corvette was the best job I ever took on." Eleanor smiled, touching his face gently. "And hiring you to fix it was the best decision I ever made." They walked inside together, closing the door on the snowy night. The home they'd created, not just the physical structure, but the family within it, embraced them with warmth and light. In the garage, the red Corvette sat gleaming, its job complete. What had begun as a simple mechanical failure had catalyzed something far more significant: the restoration of broken hearts, the rebuilding of shattered dreams, the discovery that second chances sometimes arrive when least expected, but most needed. And in the end, wasn't that the most valuable restoration of all? The Montana spring had arrived in full glory, painting the meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of pine and fresh growth. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Miller home, casting golden patterns across the reclaimed wood floors. Jack paused in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene before him. A house filled with activity, purpose, and most importantly, the family that had grown in ways he could never have imagined 5 years earlier. Today marked the 5th anniversary of the Prescott Foundation's Sustainable Home Project, their home, and the property was hosting the Foundation's annual celebration. What had begun as a single family's dwelling had evolved into a showcase and inspiration for sustainable building practices across 3 states. The Miller model, as architectural journals had taken to calling it, had spawned over 30 similar projects throughout the region. "Dad, the caterers need to know where to set up the buffet," Emma called from the great room. At 20, home from her sophomore year studying environmental architecture at Montana State, she had inherited her father's practical nature along with her mother's artistic sensibility. Her long, dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail as she coordinated the day's events with the efficiency of someone twice her age. "Tell them the stone patio," Jack replied, moving to help her. "The weather's perfect for an outdoor gathering." Beyond the windows, he could see Lucas near the creek, leading a group of impressed-looking Foundation board members on a tour of his weather and environmental monitoring system. At 15, his son had grown nearly as tall as Jack, his interest in science having blossomed into genuine expertise. The independent research station he'd established along the creek was contributing data to a statewide watershed health initiative, something that filled Jack with quiet pride. "Jack?" Eleanor's voice came from behind him. "The documentary crew is set up by the workshop. They'd like to get some footage of you with the Corvette." He turned to find his wife of 3 years crossing the room toward him, as elegant at 77 as she had been when they first met. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, and her eyes still held the warmth and intelligence that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "I'll be right there," he promised, pausing to kiss her cheek. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Take your time. I told them you were busy managing a small army of guests." Jack laughed. "More like our daughter is managing all of us." The transformation of their lives over 5 years had been remarkable. Jack's small mechanic business had evolved into Miller Restoration, a specialized enterprise focusing on classic car restoration with an environmental twist. His workshop, attached to their home, but expanded twice since the original construction, now employed 4 full-time craftsmen and had a waiting list stretching 6 months. His innovation, converting vintage vehicles to electric power while maintaining their classic aesthetics, had garnered national attention in automotive circles. What had begun as a personal project with Eleanor's Corvette had grown into a signature service that attracted collectors from across the country. "Mr. Miller?" A young woman from the documentary crew appeared at his elbow. "Whenever you're ready, we'd love to get that footage with the Corvette. It's such a perfect symbol for the whole project." Jack nodded, following her outside and across the yard to where the gleaming red Stingray sat in the dappled shade of an aspen grove. For their 3rd wedding anniversary, he had converted Eleanor's beloved car to electric power, preserving its classic look and feel while giving it new technological life, a perfect metaphor for their relationship and the home they'd built together. The Corvette now occupied a place of honor on the property, sometimes used for weekend drives, but primarily serving as a reminder of how their journey together had begun. Jack often found Eleanor simply sitting in the driver's seat, lost in thought or memory, connecting to both her past with Thomas and her present with the Miller family. As Jack approached the car, he spotted Abby leading another tour group through her native plant garden. At 11, his youngest had developed a passionate interest in botany, encouraged by Eleanor's knowledge and connections. Together, they had established a native plant nursery that supplied stock for restoration projects throughout the county. Abby's animated explanations to the visitors, punctuated by her characteristic hand gestures, made him smile. She had blossomed from the timid 6-year-old who'd lost her mother into a confident young naturalist with a gift for communication. "If you could just explain the conversion process," the documentary director suggested, positioning Jack beside the Corvette. "The Foundation wants to emphasize how traditional craftsmanship can align with modern sustainability." Jack ran his hand along the car's sleek hood, a gesture that had become almost ritualistic. "The beauty of converting classics like this is that we're honoring their design and history while giving them a technology that extends their life and reduces their environmental impact," he explained, as cameras rolled. Just like this house takes traditional Montana building elements and reimagines them with sustainable systems. After the interview, Jack made his way back toward the main gathering, stopping to chat with various guests. Michael Turner, whose classic car showroom in Bozeman had become a collaborative partner with Miller Restoration, was deep in conversation with a potential client. The two businesses had grown together, each strengthening the other through referrals and joint projects. "Jack," Michael called him over, "tell Malcolm here about the 57 Thunderbird conversion we completed last month." As Jack explained the intricate process of maintaining the car's classic feel while updating its systems, he caught sight of Robert across the lawn. Eleanor's attorney had become a close friend and regular visitor, his initial professional connection evolving into genuine affection for the entire family. Beside him stood Diana Stevens, the foundation's new executive director, who had taken a special interest in their latest initiative. "There you are," Eleanor said, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne once Jack had finished his conversation. "The board members are impressed with the property expansion plans. Diana says it's exactly the kind of project Thomas would have championed." Jack accepted the glass, clinking it gently against Eleanor's. "5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this." They had recently purchased an additional 2,000 acres adjacent to their property when the neighboring ranch came up for sale. Following Eleanor's original vision, they had placed most of it in a conservation trust, ensuring it would remain wild and undeveloped forever. The remainder was designated for an educational center that would offer workshops on sustainable building techniques, renewable energy systems, and ecological restoration. "Emma's designs for the education center are exceptional," Eleanor commented, pride evident in her voice. "She's incorporated elements from this house while adding innovations of her own." The foundation board approved the funding unanimously. They watched as Emma moved confidently among the guests, explaining architectural drawings displayed on easels near the stone patio. Her passion for sustainable design had been sparked by watching their house take shape, and now she was contributing her own vision to the family legacy. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, the more formal part of the celebration concluded. Foundation board members departed with renewed enthusiasm for their mission. Journalists and documentary crew packed up their equipment with promises to share rough cuts before publication. Neighbors and friends lingered longer, the gathering transitioning into a more intimate affair. By sunset, only family and closest friends remained. They gathered around the outdoor fire pit Jack had built the previous summer, the flames casting a warm glow as twilight deepened. The ancient grinding stone, now incorporated into the outdoor fireplace as a hearth extension, caught the firelight in a way that emphasized its centuries of history. "I think it's time," Eleanor said quietly to Jack as they watched the children. "Gather wood for the fire," he nodded, understanding immediately. They had discussed this moment for weeks, waiting for the right opportunity. "Everyone," Jack called, gaining their attention. "Eleanor and I have an announcement." The group settled around the fire, Emma, Lucas, and Abby, Robert and his wife, the Turners, Dave Wilson, who had overseen the original construction and had become a close friend, and several others who had been part of their journey from the beginning. "As you know," Eleanor began, "the Thomas Prescott Foundation was established to honor my late husband's commitment to environmental conservation and sustainability." She paused, emotion briefly tightening her voice. "For 5 years, this home and this family have been the Foundation's flagship project, demonstrating how sustainable living can be both practical and beautiful." Jack took her hand, continuing where she had left off. Today we're announcing the establishment of the Sarah Miller Memorial Scholarship, which will provide full funding for 5 students each year to study environmental design, sustainable engineering or conservation biology. Emma's eyes widened, tears forming immediately. Lucas straightened, his usual teenage nonchalance giving way to surprise and emotion. Abby moved closer to Eleanor, slipping her hand into the older woman's. "Mom would have loved that," Emma said softly. Jack nodded. She believed education was the key to everything, and this way her memory continues to create positive change. "There's more," Eleanor added. "The foundation is also establishing the Miller Prescott Innovation Grant, which will fund projects that combine traditional craftsmanship with sustainable technologies, just like Jack's work with classic cars." The announcement was met with raised glasses and heartfelt congratulations. As conversation resumed around the fire, Jack found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. 5 years earlier, he had been a struggling single father, barely keeping his garage open, living paycheck to paycheck while trying to help his children heal from their mother's death. Now, he ran a thriving business doing work he loved. His children were flourishing, each finding their own path while remaining connected to the family's core values. And he had found love again with Eleanor, whose chance breakdown outside his garage had changed everything. "Penny for your thoughts," Eleanor said, echoing a phrase that had become familiar between them. Jack smiled, taking her hand. Just gratitude for broken timing belts and second chances. "And for having the courage to take them," she added, the firelight illuminating her face. As the evening deepened, Robert approached with a small wooden box. "I think it's time for this," he said, handing it to Eleanor. She accepted it with a nod of thanks, then turned to the gathered family. "There's one more thing we wanted to share tonight." She opened the box, revealing an antique key nestled on velvet. "This is the original key to the main house on Thomas's and my Boston property. We've decided to donate the house to the foundation, to be used as its East Coast headquarters. The decision had not been easy. The Boston house represented Eleanor's life with Thomas, filled with memories of their 42 years together. But over the past year, as she had embraced her new life in Montana completely, the Boston property had remained empty, visited only during Eleanor's increasingly infrequent business trips east. "Thomas would approve," Robert said gently. "Using it to further the foundation's work gives it purpose again." "That's what we thought," Eleanor agreed. "And it feels right to make it official today as we celebrate what we've built here." The conversation flowed easily after that, meandering through memories, current projects, and future plans. Lucas described his latest environmental monitoring innovation, developed in collaboration with a professor at Montana State. Emma shared updates on her summer internship with a sustainable architecture firm in Seattle. Abby detailed her plans for expanding the native plant nursery with species specifically adapted to post-wildfire restoration. Jack listened, marveling at the people his children had become. Emma's quiet strength and creative vision, Lucas's analytical mind and environmental conscience, Abby's nurturing spirit and determination, all three carried elements of Sarah in them, her legacy living on in their characters and choices. And all three had been shaped too by Eleanor's influence, her wisdom, her generosity, her practical approach to turning ideals into action. As the fire burned lower and the stars emerged in the clear Montana sky, Jack found himself sitting slightly apart with Eleanor, watching as the younger generation continued their animated discussions. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Eleanor asked quietly. "If my car hadn't broken down that particular day, outside that particular garage?" Jack considered the question. "Sometimes. But I've come to believe that some connections are meant to happen one way or another. That sounds almost mystical, coming from such a practical mechanic, she teased. He chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe it's just that good people doing good things tend to find each other eventually. He looked at the gathering, his family expanded and strengthened by circumstance and choice. Though I'm grateful we didn't have to wait any longer than we did. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural between them. As am I. From across the fire, Emma caught Jack's eye and smiled. A smile so like her mother's that it sometimes took his breath away. Yet there was something uniquely Emma there too, a blend of her past and her own emerging identity. Jack returned the smile, feeling a profound sense of continuity. The ancient grinding stone gleamed in the firelight, a testament to the generations who had gathered in this same spot, from the Blackfeet centuries ago, to Thomas and Eleanor during their brief visits, to the Miller-Prescott family now making their permanent home here. Jack often thought about this continuity, the way the land connected them to something larger than themselves. I think, Eleanor said softly, that this is exactly where we're meant to be. Jack couldn't have agreed more. The journey from that first meeting, a woman with a broken-down Corvette, a man trying to hold his fracturing life together, to this moment of completion and new beginnings had been extraordinary. A mechanical failure had led to emotional restoration. A chance encounter had opened the door to deliberate connection. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Jack and Eleanor stood on the broad stone patio, watching as the lights of cars disappeared down the long drive toward the county road. Inside, the children were clearing away the remains of the gathering, their voices drifting through the open windows. The red Corvette gleamed under the security lights near Jack's workshop, a testament to how something broken could lead to something beautiful when placed in the right hands. The classic lines remained unchanged, honoring its heritage, while the modern technology within gave it new life and purpose. Which, Jack reflected as he looked at his wife, and then toward the house where his children moved in the warm light, was perhaps the most valuable restoration lesson of all. Honoring what came before while building something new. Finding balance between preservation and innovation, understanding that the most important repairs aren't to engines or timing belts, but to lives and hearts. The night air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, familiar and comforting. Tomorrow would bring new projects, challenges, and opportunities. The education center would break ground next month. Emma would leave for her summer internship in 2 weeks. Lucas had a regional science competition coming up. Abby's native plant inventory needed updating before the summer planting season. But for now, at this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. "Shall we go in?" Eleanor suggested, her hand finding his. "Yes," Jack said simply, turning toward the home they had built together in every sense of the word. "Let's go home." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.